The story of Powder Hollow, it's really three things. One, it's gunpowder. It's the story of gunpowder and how it's made. Two, it's also, of course, the story of Augustus Hazard. And three, it's the powder works itself, and the history of the powder works starting in 1835 to the last explosion in 1913. To bring all those things together, I'd like to start first with gunpowder. And just briefly, because we're going to be talking about gunpowder for the entire talk, and just what is gunpowder? Just basically, without getting into the chemistry, Ralph Sweet here, he can do the whole thing for me, but 75% saltpeter, and that saltpeter originally came from Calcutta in India. But as the relations soured with Britain during the Civil War, we actually got cut off. Britain may have sided with the South, so they stopped the supply of saltpeter for potassium nitrate, and then for the rest of the time it came from Chile. 15% sulfur, and sulfur came from Sicily. And 10% charcoal. And if anybody knows Soapstone Mountain over in Summers, if you hike up Soapstone Mountain, you will see a plaque about halfway down talking about the alder trees that were harvested there and used for charcoal. That's the secret ingredient. And Hazard powder was the charcoal came from the alder tree, which was in the willow family. And that really is what made the powder better than any other powder. Just briefly how the process works without getting too bogged down. The pulverized sulfur is mixed with charcoal. And later on when I show you pictures of the powder works, you'll see the refineries. And then that mixture is combined with the saltpeter, water, and it makes a paste. And then the mixture is rolled under two 8-ton wheels, amazing, for 6 hours. And that'll do about 300 pounds of powder every 6 hours. And then the mixture is taken to a press mill and pressed into 12 by 18-inch slabs and covered with cloth. And I'll show you pictures of how that was transported. When it's pressed into these cakes, it's taken to a corning mill and it's poured into different sized granules. And the granules are then taken to a glaze mill and powders packed, stored in magazines, and then shipped. That's a very simplistic explanation of the entire process. And if you walk the grounds of the hollow, that 400 acres, it's absolutely amazing to see the way it was laid out. It's really, people could make a study, an engineering study, an economic study of the works. It's absolutely intriguing. Where's the powder mill? It's located obviously along the Scantic River. It was about 500 acres, about 1.5 miles long. It's on land that was once owned by a surgeon from the Revolutionary War. I'm sorry, let me just back up a second here. This is the way the powder was sorted by grains. From F, double F, triple F, and 4F. The more Fs, the finer the grain. It was used for blasting powder, it was used for rifles, used for cannons. All the sporting powder, all different types of powder was made there. And this is one of the advertisements that the powder company, Hazard Powder Company, used to promote the sale of the powder. And you can see they've got all the different grains of the powder, and that was done at the corning mill. And as I said, this is the hollow, one of the maps of the hollow. I've got other maps up here. This is the map that's sold by the Historical Society. And it's really an amazing location. When you look at a perfect place to manufacture gunpowder, you couldn't pick a better place. You've got the Scantic River running through it. The steep banks to protect from all the explosions, all 39 explosions that took place in the life of the hollow, of the powder mill. Just the whole terrain, the way it's set up, it couldn't be a better place. And as I said, this hollow was originally owned by Dr. Allen, who was a surgeon during the Revolutionary War. And his tomb was just going up Maple Street, just above the barn. And the remains were sacked very early on after he was buried there. But that's where he was buried. And we had the hollow was also very close to the Connecticut River. The railroads wouldn't take the powder, so for transportation, getting raw materials in and getting the powder out, it's really a perfect source. And again, had a great source of the wood for making charcoal. Let me just back up. Now I'm going to talk a little about Augustus Hazard. And Augustus Hazard eventually is going to merge with Loomis, Denslow and Company. So Augustus George Hazard was born April 28 in 1802 in South Kingston, Rhode Island. He was a son retired sea captain and a painter. Very early on in his life, when he was 5 years old, they moved to Columbia, Connecticut when Hazard was 6. And at 15, kind of following his father's footsteps, became an apprentice painter. In 1822, at the age of 20, Hazard moved to Savannah, Georgia. And he began trading in paints and oils and the other merchandise that he could make $1 on. So he was very industrious at a very young age. And while he was in Georgia, he joined the Brighton Artillery, which was really where he became a colonel. He really wasn't very active in it, but that's where he got the title, Colonel Augustus Hazard. He never fought. But that's where his title came from, and that's going to come back to haunt him a little bit later when we talk about some of the allegations made about Colonel Hazard. And he would keep that title the rest of his life. In 1827, he moved to New York, and he established a shipping and commission sales business. He was running package ships between New York and Savannah, again trading in paints and oil, and now he picked up a new line, Gunpowder. And that's where he decided that if he was really going to make real money, in his words, he was going to get into manufacturing. So in 1832, Hazard marries Salome Merrill, a West Hartford girl that he actually met in Savannah. They would have 4 daughters and 2 sons. And some of the sons, as you'll hear later on, died a pretty tragic death, and so did one of the fiancés of one of the daughters. So now fast forward, 1836, and Hazard's in New York, and Allen Loomis, who was a fur trader and a cigar manufacturer from Suffield, Connecticut, buys the 500 acres that Dr. Allen owned. And he's along the Scandic River, and he's going to establish a powder mill. And Loomis has, for partners, his 2 brothers, Parks and Neelan, and also Allen A. Denslow of New Haven, Connecticut. And they begin a powder mill. And very early on, they find that the quality of the powder is poor. Now, this is the picture of the first mill, and that's the South Maple Street Bridge. The barn is over here. Okay, so that's the picture of the mill, and that was built in 1835. This is what we call the Middle Dam, and that was the first dam that was built. And today, the ruins are there. See if I have the picture of the ruins in here. I don't have a picture of the ruins here, but you're all familiar with the ruins of the dam that were there. So that began in 1835 and 1836, and they did not like the quality of the powder, so they sent to England for help. And help was on the way, and the Pricketts arrived, William and Henry Prickett, in the fall of 1836. And then they start really building, and they now have 3 rolling mills working. The Prickett family itself met a lot of tragedy. Henry was burned in 1838, quite severely. His brother George was killed in 1842, and another brother, William, who came over, was killed in 1844. But later, 2 Pricketts became the superintendents of the mill from 1867 to 1906. Edward Prickett, and was succeeded by his son, Edward L. Prickett, till it closed in 1913. Now, around this time, Hazard became an agent for Loomis Denslow, and he bought a next year in 1837, he buys in, and he buys a quarter interest in the powder works, and the name changes to the Loomis Hazard Company in 1837. Very early on, in 1839, as the mill is working, the first explosion takes place. And we're able to find several accounts of these explosions. And you can just imagine being a loved one, of somebody who died at the mill when you hear the accounts of some of these things. 3 men were working about the buildings in the morning. John Mathis, Frank Porter, and Thomas Gibson. The 2 former were rolling a car from a small building to the press mill, only a few feet distant. Gibson stood in the door of the building watching his fellow workmen, who had gotten within 15 feet of the press mill when an explosion occurred. He was thrown down. A portion of the structure fell upon him, injuring him about the head and back and cutting his face, but inflicting no dangerous wounds. When the smoke had cleared away, search was made for Mathers and Porter, whose bodies were finally found in the water of the sluiceway, a short distance from the press mill. They presented a horrid sight. Mathers had his right arm blown off, close up to the shoulder. His face was badly disfigured, and there were several holes in his breast and other parts of his body. He was about 37 and leaves a wife to whom he was married but 7 months. Porter's body contained but a few marks, but his face was blackened, and nearly all of the upper portion of his head was completely blown off. He was 35 and unmarried. That's a nice obit. Very, very graphic. Okay, and again, that's the first mill. You can see the sign for the wallop going up towards Wallop. In 1842, as I say, the upper dam was built on the north side of the Scantic opens up. And this is now progressing up the north side of the river heading east, because the mill evolved first going up towards the east on the north side of the river. So again, that's the first mill. And as we progress up the river, this is again, there's the mill again with a barn. And this is what now is called the Middle Dam. And you can see the charge house that's there. This building is gone, but you can find the ruins of it now. And of course, there's the dam. That's all that's left of the Middle Dam right now. Okay, now we're going up the river. There's the charge house, and this is Mankiller. And Mankiller got the name because all the explosions took place killed anybody who was there. Matter of fact, I can't read any accounts except for this first account of anybody surviving an explosion. Kind of a misnomer. That's not where the biggest explosion took place, but that's Mankiller. And here's some of the workers now standing in front of Mankiller. Now, inside these mills, as I said, were the 8-ton double wheels. And this is from the museum in Delaware. And those are the 2 8-ton wheels. And this is where the powder was incorporated here, was mixed. So these wheels turned around. And after 6 hours, it was done. And you can see how they rotated. This is another picture of another mill. This is the going up the river. This would be a corning mill. And the corning mill is where the powder was broken up, the cakes were broken up. It's a very elaborate piece of equipment. Some of these were powered by steam and some by water. And this is the glaze. I'll show you pictures of the glaze. But inside the glaze mills, as we go up the river, this was 7.5 feet long and about 4.5 feet in diameter. And they were rawhide barrels, and the powder tumbled in that. And the glazing process was they smoothed off the edges on the powder, and they added graphite to it so it wouldn't get clumped, and so it flowed very smoothly. All right, this is Mankiller, what it looked like, and here's Mankiller burning. And you can see the ruins of Mankiller today. If you hike there on the north side of the river, you can actually see it from the south side. More pictures of the workmen going up the river. You can see the river doesn't look too much different now. More pictures of the mill. And up a little bit further to the east is another double wheel mill. That's about 400 feet from Mankiller. And here's the double wheel mill burning. We'll talk about the construction of these buildings in a second. I believe this is the bridge going over from Cooper Street, the Cooper Street Bridge. I'm not 100% sure. When you blow this up, if you look at the embankment, the footings there, I think that's where it is. Sometimes it's very hard to determine that, but we'll do some more research on it. Now this is the glaze. Again, that's where the rawhide tumblers are in there, and the powder has the edges taken off. And there was an account of a problem at the glaze. The cause of explosion is seldom known. Sometimes it will be judged an ill-attempted haste to complete a day's work, a little delay on the part of someone who sleeps when he should be awake. or a flash of lightning during a storm. Any one of these causes and many others are sufficient to loosen the full force of death-dealing possibilities. James Colburn, a black boss in the company of another employee, was driving by the glaze in which was stored 20 tons of powder when he smelled smoke. Colburn told the man he was with to make haste to get away, and he went himself to shut off the power in the mill, and upon investigation, found a corner of it on fire. He got some buckets of water and managed to extinguish the fire. Had the fire reached the powder, the building of Mr. Colburn would have blown up, and there would have been but a few windows left in the village. Now, going up the river some more, that's another picture of the glaze. If you hike up the river, the only thing you can see left of this building are 4 vertical beams in the bank, and you can see the pipe from the water coming in from the raceway. And this is what we call, this is the upper dam, and you can see there was a catwalk, and you can see the bridge above us. This all stands now. That's all there. When you hike up all the way up, you can see that there. And we have a picture of this in, sorry. Okay, and that's a little more. Now, intriguing is when this dam was built. This dam was built to power manpower and the double wheel mill. What they did is they built the dam up here, and they took the water, comes in over here on my left, and runs in a raceway all the way down the river, almost all the way down to the barn. And that's where the water came from. Really quite intriguing. There's a catwalk there, and this particular mill right here is the original mill that got moved up there eventually. So you can just see, the engineering feat that went on. But basically, that dam is still intact, to this day. And that's, you can see, as I said, you can see let me go back up here. Okay, this building right here. This is what's left of it today. So, absolutely amazing. And this is what's left of the dam today. A little foggy when I took the picture. I couldn't take it on a sunny day. But, okay. And that was called the Charter Dam. And later on, in 1872, the new works was built on the south side of the river. So, in 1843, Hazard finally buys a majority interest in the Hazard Powder Company. Stock at that point in time is valued at over $66,000. He's the principal owner, and Alan Denslow still has a small piece of it. And Hazard moves his family to a beautiful home on Route 5 in Enfield. And it's said that the staircase was gold leaf and cost Hazard over $40,000. So he must have been, even at that time, a man of immense wealth. Now we're in the middle of the 1840s, and what's going on? We have the Mexican-American War, and we have the beginning of the gold rush, and these dramatically increase the demand for powder. We have the westward expansion, so again, the mill is booming. And then in 1849, steam mills are installed, and the Horseshoe Dam, let me see, this is the barn. Horseshoe Dam. Oh, it's a little out of place. Okay, but the Horseshoe Dam, I'll show you the Horseshoe Dam in a minute. The Horseshoe Dam is built in 1846. The barn is built, and this you can see it had a lot of other buildings attached to it. And inside the barn today, it's absolutely spectacular how Ralph has preserved that. And you can just see the teamsters here and all the wagons that we used. It doesn't look too much different. And this is the blast wall. If you're just going west near the barn, that blast wall is there today. Here's the Horseshoe Dam. Now this is the dam, by the barn. We're calling that the middle dam, and this is the Horseshoe Dam, which is the lower dam. And that's used to channel the water to get into Greenland Pond, going down Powder Hill Road. And here's a picture from underneath the Maple Street Bridge. The Horseshoe Dam is right there. It's absolutely amazing if you can trace the way the water flowed through the whole powder works. If you go up Powder Hill Road, on the left was an aqueduct. There's virtually nothing left of it. We did find some stones last fall. of where it was. On the right, the water went from the Horseshoe Dam and created Greenland Pond. It's unbelievable what the design of this and the labor that must have been involved to do this. I mean, we know that a lot of Irish came over and did a lot of the construction. Men from Scotland and men from Italy did a lot of the work. So it's absolutely, when you look at how did they move it, how did they move the stones, it's unbelievable, the engineering that went on for that. And this, you can see what the Horseshoe Dam did. This is creating a raceway to get down to Greenland and Magazine Ponds. That's going up Powder Hill Road. Any questions at all so far? Yes, sir.
I've got a few questions. Cooper Street, they make barrels there for the gunpowder, that's why it's Cooper Street?
At Cooper Street, Hazard built the original Cooper Street, got the town to take it over. The Cooperage facility was across the bridge. I think it's near the foot of Gordon Street. Okay, and it was over in that area. If you hike up the river, it's sort of like a peninsula that comes out, and like a cove. And there were 5 or 6 buildings there, and they made all the barrels and the cans and the kegs were made there, yes. That's
how much gunpowder were they producing to start, like, in the 1840s, say?
I'm not sure in the 1840s. I can tell in the 1860s they were producing 12,500 pounds of powder a day. A day. Yeah, you do the math. I'll do the math in a second. But basically in 1861 you had 18 rolling mills going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So every 6 hours, each mill is turning out 600 pounds of powder. So it's 600 times 18 times 4, and you do it. It comes out to 12,000 pounds a day.
Did the rolling mills just break the charcoal powder, or were they mixing
they call it an incorporation mill. It incorporated the charcoal, the sulfur, and the potassium nitrate, the saltpeter.
Wasn't that? Was it metal to metal?
Well, no, it was in a wooden trough.
Okay.
It was in a wooden trough, so there wouldn't be any spark. The wheels were metal. And we'll go over that in just a second, just the whole process. So again, you can see now that's getting down to the powder make. That's the refineries. And the work was dangerous. And here's an account of just what could happen, talking about how dangerous it would be for somebody working. Donald Perron was a workman employed in the powder mills. Was quite seriously burned while at his work Tuesday night of last week. Perron was lighting a lantern when the powder dust in his hat ignited, and as he was endeavoring to brush the fire out, the flames quickly spread to his coat. He rushed out the door and extinguished the flames by jumping in the canal. He was badly burned about the hands and back. So, we'll see that they actually started a practice where the men had to change their clothes when they came to work. They couldn't have any clothes with pockets, cuffs, and they were actually inspected to make sure they didn't have any matches. So in 1849, little bit of Augustus Hazard personality comes to light. He has 4 employees, Greeley, Tudor, Gowdy, and Loomis starts the Enfield Powder Company in Skiddaco, just up the river. And that lasts till 1854. The word absorbed was absorbed by the Hazard Powder Company, but Hazard was a businessman. He used a little bit of practice called predatory pricing. He drove his competition out of business by lowering the price. In those days, it's a very accepted practice. Yes, sir?
Is that the bridge in Powerhouse Road right there?
Right here?
Yeah.
This is a view of the refineries. If you were to go, it's west of the barn, way out direction off where the ball field is, but way in. There's ponds where the ball field is now. That's way back. We're going west down the river. Okay, the river is. I'll get my pointer up in the back there. Also, in 1858, again going more towards the intrigue about Hazard, he has some visitors, and this is not going to cooperate with me. We'll find the pictures of the visitors. I'm sorry, this is something that comes out of sync. He had visitors. He had in 1858, he had under Franklin Pierce, he had Jefferson Davis visit. What a great character. He was the Secretary of War under Franklin Pierce. And Jefferson Davis is a guest at Hazard's house and actually presents Hazard with an award for being an outstanding businessman. Also, about 4 or 5 years earlier, Hazard had another famous guest, Daniel Webster. And, you think that's very benign. How would that affect the rumor about Webster? Well, Webster was a Whig. And a Whig, in the Whig Party in those days, the Whigs did not want to have a civil war. Of course, everything was fermenting in the country at that time, going way back, for secession. So the Whigs wanted to compromise. They did everything they could possibly do to compromise. So they were really anti-abolitionists. They believed in states' rights, popular sovereignty. So that, in the back of people's mind, okay, years ago, Daniel Webster visits Hazard, and now Jefferson Davis. And you talk about the poster person for the Confederacy. There's the future president of the Confederacy is here in Enfield, and he's a friend of Hazard. So you can see where some of these rumors took place. Hazard was very involved with politics. He was a member of the Whig Party. He was very active in the state of Connecticut, and he actually ran for governor, or lieutenant governor, in 1861. The Whig Party ended, and Hazard became a Democrat. He became a Northern Democrat. So in the election of 1860 for Lincoln, you had Breckinridge, who was a Southern Democrat. You had Lincoln running, and then you had Stephen A. Douglas running. Okay, thank you. And Hazard supported Stephen A. Douglas, and we know that Stephen A. Douglas was, again, didn't want the country to split up, and he was, we all think that everybody was an abolitionist in the North, and that's not necessarily true. There were a great number of the population did not care whether slavery ended, and certainly didn't want to see the country a fragment. So that leads us up into, and I'm a little out of sync here on my presentation. These are all pictures of the refinery. Well, so that brings us up until 1861, and let me see if I can just catch up here.
Was there a railroad in town by then?
I'm sorry?
Was there a railroad?
There was a railroad going out to Skiddaco. Yeah, there was a railroad going out to Skiddaco.
Did all the powder go downriver, or did it go?
It went down. They wouldn't allow any powder on the trains until 1872. So everything was hauled downriver by cart. Okay, and then in 1858, Elliot Hazard's fiance, Alexander Garish, was killed by an explosion of 1,800 pounds of powder. He was experimenting with dry powder. I'm going to back up. In 1855, I got ahead of myself. Several things happened. First, we had the Crimean War. We had Hazard shipping powder to both Russia and England. And Hazard began his relationship with DuPont. Price fixing. There was no antitrust. Wasn't going to hit them for a number of years later. So Hazard and DuPont established a relationship. They conspired. They agreed on how much they would ship. They agreed on the prices they would ship. They didn't want to see each other go out of business. So it was a very cordial relationship. There's letters that you can read, Hazard corresponding with DuPont. And today it's illegal. It's price fixing. But in those days, it wasn't. And we can put our values on him now, but he was a very astute businessman. So that he shipped over 100,000 pounds of powder to Russia and almost an equal amount to England. So, they supplied that. In 1855, the first of one of Hazard's family tragedies occurred when Horace Hazard Hamilton, 33, was killed testing powder. I'm going to fast forward. He was testing powder in a mortar. The mortar, the proofing ground, was going up Powder Hill Road. It'd be on your left across from the gates where the water company has the gates now. If you get out of your car and you look, you'll see some stones there, and that's where the mortar was. That would throw a 24-pound ball. And in the Historical Society, it was one of the cannonballs there. But Horace Hazard was killed there at 33 years of age, testing the powder. Here we go. I found him. There's Jefferson Davis and my good friend Daniel Webster. Okay. up to the Civil War. The Civil War, of course, starts on April 12th in 1861. And at that point in time, Hazard's production was close to $1 million a year. And here we have, what's the case against Augustus Hazard? All the intrigue. He was a member of the Georgia militia, as I said earlier. He had numerous customers in the South. So if you're one, that could explain maybe his political leanings, if he didn't want the country to fragment. Maybe that's why he was a Northern Democrat and supported Stephen A. Douglas. Makes sense. Doesn't mean that he was not a loyal American, not loyal to the Union. He was selling tremendous amounts of powder to South Carolina. South Carolina had been stockpiling powder for years and years. Jefferson Davis had visited his house. Daniel Webster had visited his house. Now, just prior to the Civil War breaking out, Hazard gave an order to sell all his powder. He had powder magazines all over the country. He owned property in more states than any other American alive at that point in time. He had to have the powder stored outside of all these towns. He couldn't store powder in downtown anywhere. Of course, when it blows, we'll hear some accounts in a second. So that he had property all over, and he gave orders to sell all his property. There's a letter that he got from Raphael Semmes, who became a Confederate admiral, inquiring whether he wanted to place an order from the Hazard Powder Company. He actually wanted Hazard to come into the South and build a powder mill. So you had all this in play. When the war broke out, Confederates actually seized over 600 tons of powder. So when Fort Sumter is fired upon, the states are seizing the powder magazines, and all the powder was used in that bombardment on both sides came from this town. Imagine that, it came from the Hazard fireworks on both sides. So one of the ironies of that, not only that, you had the Confederate General Beauregard firing on his former West Point instructor, Anderson. So it's loaded with irony, what happened at Fort Sumter, but that's where the powder came from. If you look at the movie Glory, you're going to see Hazard powder as one of the props in the movie Glory. That's the case against Hazard, and he was outspoken, but I can say this, I can stand here, and if I'm in the first person, there's nothing you can say about Augustus George Hazard that can prove that he ever conspired with a Confederacy at all. In fact, right after the war broke out, he writes a letter to the paper, and he says what he's going to do. He's going to donate money for uniforms and material. And he gave several $1,000s to equip the soldiers. And there's nothing else anybody could ever found that could ever possibly prove that he was disloyal to the Union. So in 1861, the mill is going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We've got 18 rolling mills, 7 granulating mills, screw presses, and 50 buildings that are used for everything: dusting, sorting, drying, mixing, pulverizing, packing, refining, the cooperage, machine shop, wash house, the stables, the charcoal retorts, the corporate office, even had a firing range. 25 water wheels are going, 3 steam engines. Again, that 125 buildings in the powder works. South Street is known as Smoke Street from the charcoal retorts because they're making charcoal there. As I said, most of the employees originally from England and then eventually from Scotland and Ireland. And how were the buildings constructed? The buildings were, there's some of the powder, 20-pound carat. I'm going to get ahead of myself again here. Okay, that's the Hazard Institute. But the buildings were structured so that they would have 3 relatively strong walls and 1 wall that was constructed so when the mill blew, it would blow out. And that weak side was always towards the river. And they were set way apart to try to avoid chain reactions, and a lot of times they didn't avoid the chain reactions. One side was loosely nailed vertically or constructed with wooden pegs, and they were all unheated and unlit. So even the dead of winter, there was no heat in those buildings. The latches were wooden. The town actually had a few windows facing inwards towards the hollow. St. Bernard's Church actually bricked over their stained glass window. Every time there was an explosion, it blew out the stained glass window. So I decided to brick it over. As I said, workers had to change their clothes when they came to the work. They would change at a wash house. They had no pockets, no cuffs. The shoes had to have wooden pegs to avoid sparks. All the tools and shovels and rakes were wooden, and actually the stools just had one leg. If anybody fell asleep, they wanted them to wake up. They were responsible for keeping it going. And usually there was only one person in a building at a time, only one worker. And the most dangerous time was when they either shut the machinery off or did something to service the machinery. Several of the explosions started when the machinery started up, and nobody knows what happened. We'll never know what happened. The average pay was somewhere between $1 and $3 a day, and no life insurance was offered. But guess what? If you died in the mill, one of your relatives could take your place. So that was a big benefit. Now let me see if I can just catch up here. Any questions? Well, there's the wooden tools. Those are wooden shovels. Okay, now the powder was moved around in carts on wooden tracks. Originally they had some steel tracks. Of course, when lightning hits, I'll see you later. So they had wooden tracks, and you can see there's some incredible pictures. That's actually a cart that was taking ice off the river. And the hand carts were called angel buggies, because if you blew up, you went to see the angels. So, and you can see it's the wooden track. And if you hike the hollow, you can see the berms where these roads were. It's absolutely fascinating, especially when there's a little bit of snow on the ground. It's really remarkable to see. And you have all the different wagons loading up. You can see the sophisticated system. Some of these buildings we haven't identified yet. And you can just see some of the workers here. And just look at those faces.
Was the Greenland pond a siphoning pond for transportation, or was it driving over the mill?
Greenland pond was used to power the Greenland Mill. And I just read an account, in the middle of Greenland Pond there was an island that was supposedly an old hotel there too. But the Greenland Mill, you can find the Greenland Mill. It's one of the mills that's really intact as far as the raceway. Greenland Mill, the water went from the pond to a holding pond, a sluice gate opened up and it powered the mill. And then the water went way down and eventually went back into the Scantic River.
How much of a drop is it?
Oh, I can't tell you in terms of elevation. I can't, but the pond was big. I've got some pictures of the pond coming up. And here's the charcoal. They're hauling charcoal, and these are just some of the hothouse where they press cakes were dried. Tom Kennedy, and this is looking down. This is from the down where the ball field is now. Just quickly, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but after the Civil War, Hazard died in the Civil War ended in 1865, and Hazard died in 1868. And he was in New York at the Astor Hotel when he died. His remains were brought home. Let me just give an account here of his death. Yes, in 1868 he died at the Astor Hotel. Cordial were the expressions, both far and near, from individuals in the public press, showing a great sense of loss. Many thousands, comprising persons from all walks of life, assembled at the funeral in a long-drawn valley of the Connecticut, studded with homes of culture. Rarely a man passed away whose death had been so keenly felt and so widely mourned. He left in his will, $8,000 in a lot to build a Hazard Institute. So I think that's where I got a little bit ahead of myself here. And his home was later converted to an inn in 1970. It was destroyed by fire. After Hazard's death, we get into this whole Gunpowder Trade Association. The remaining stockholders took control of the Hazard Powder Works, and the Gunpowder Trade Association is formed. And that's when the real conspiracy takes place, long after Hazard's death. And right up until the end of the 1800s, when the government actually stepped in, and we had the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. And eventually they broke up the gunpowder companies. They broke up their trade association to try to stop the price rigging. It was an era after the war. Of course, the demand for powder plummeted, and they all tried to survive. These are some of the buildings now going down. This is going down towards the ball field. And this is in the ball field now. And that was the area was called Canister Hill. And here's the wagons bringing the powder up that's going to get ready to be packed. In the 1880s, the 1890s saw the area of the greatest production, actually 6.25 million pounds of blasting powder annually, and 2.5 million pounds of sporting powder was produced. Now, just some accounts of some of the explosions that may be of interest. I skipped over 1862 was when the worst explosion took place, and that was just around what was called the Cracker Mill, right around just to the west of the barn. And this was an explosion that killed 9 people. And just some of these counts are absolutely horrific. One of the most appalling calamities that's ever occurred in this city for many years was caused by explosion of the powder mills of the Hazard Powder Company in Hazardville about 3 o'clock this afternoon. The cause of this explosion is a mystery and probably will be forever unknown, as of all the employees in the building were instantly killed. The first occurred in the press mill, was followed rapid succession by blowing up the other 4 mills in the immediate facilities. The buildings were wooden and were very easily blown to atoms to a great distance in all directions. The total among the powder destroyed is estimated to be 40 tons of powder. Can you imagine that? And all was to be shipped to the Federal Army in just a few days. Fortunately, there weren't many great hands at work at the time of the explosion, or the loss of life would have been much larger than the case. There were 8 killed outright, and a few are injured. The killed are as follows: Edward Graham and Henry Clark, Patrick Fallon, Jess Reddy, Patrick Kearney, all employed in the press building. Arthur Beach was washing himself in the corning mill, was also killed, and Cynthia Smith, the only female to be killed at the works. She was in the cartridge building making cartridges. She ran out when the first explosion occurred, and she was hit by a falling timber. She was fatally injured. All the above, with the exception of Miss Smith, were married relief families. The 2 Beaches killed were brothers. Only the bodies of Arthur Beach and Miss Smith were immediately recovered. The others were blown to pieces. The fragments found were heads, fingers, and portions of limbs, all of which filled an ordinary water pail, and were found in all directions in a great distance from the explosion. There is scarcely a vestige left of the building destroyed. So severe was the concussion that the dwelling houses within 2 mills were unroofed, trees uprooted, horses, cattle, and people prostrated, and the explosion distantly heard in Northampton and East Brookfield, Massachusetts, over 50 miles distant. And Springfield, houses were jarred as if by an earthquake. Imagine that. And the same account, here's another account of the same explosion, just briefly. 1 human foot was found a quarter of a mile distant. All that could be found of the 6 men. 1 man was crossing a bridge with a mule and cart near the mill. Not a vestige of the man could be found. A mule was torn in two parts, one half being thrown across the stream, the other thrown over the trees in a field several hundred feet distant, while the cart was demolished. Another man was bathing in the stream. He was found lying in the water, dead, with a large stone on his head. A large elm tree, several feet through, was broken off and limbs scattered in all directions. It was reported a large piece of iron was thrown into one of the cartridge buildings, fracturing the skull of the girl that was working there, so it's a different account. Of course, no one can tell the cause of the explosion, as every man in the building was blown out of existence. So those accounts are certainly very, very graphic. So, again, these are some of the pictures of the mill, and I want to move along here because I know this is getting late. We're all right? Okay, so this is the ball field today. And you can see the hill, that South Street up there, and there's one of the other canister houses.
Did he select Hazardville because it's in between Springfield Armory and Partridge Coal Firearms?
I don't think it had anything to do with it. I mean, Hazard came here because of Loomis, Loomis and Denslow, when he wanted to get into the manufacturing. But it's certainly an ideal when you look. I mean, Hazard had a relationship with Coal, the same with Coal. I mean, he was, with the movers and shakers. But I think that's why he was here. I can't find any correlation between the Springfield Armory and the Hazard Power Works. There may have been.
Those dams were built as the factories were growing?
Yes.
The dams were there originally?
No, they were built for, yes, for the manufacture, yeah. And there's the ball field today, you can just see the difference. And this is a machine shop, and machine shop with on the left, and the keg shop, and there's the keg shop. That's the sign factory today. Was that Little John's sign factory?
Did they fill kegs of gunpowder there, or did they make kegs?
Oh, that's where they fill and label. Yeah, yeah. And this is a machine shop, and that's what's right next door to the office. And this is just going up Dust House Road. These are the buildings, and that's an original building.
What is that little brick house in Dust House Road next to the pond?
It's this one over here, or the one that says it's an
One that
office.
you just showed.
Let me back up.
I think it's that one.
Yeah, they call it the office. Just some other accounts of the explosion. One that I like, of course, as I said, Hazard had agents out selling for him. And in 1886, he had a man on the road in Galveston, Texas, representing Hazard, and there was a complaint by his distributor down there that some of the kegs were leaking. So Joseph Lanai, the traveling agent for the Hazard Powder Company, went to Galveston to take care of his customer. The powder was stored there, and they had defective kegs. They were leaking. So the salesman Lanai, who proposed to be an expert in handling powder, has a great way to solve the problem. So he, failing to make the sale to the Brown Company, arranged with E.S. Wood & Sons to transfer the powder to their magazine, situated down the island beyond the city limits. He left the damaged powder in the Brown magazine until the morning, when, in the company of Thomas Grew, an employee of the Hazard agent, he visited a magazine for the purpose of destroying the damaged powder. They carried the powder 150 feet from the magazine. Lanai picked up the head in the heads a couple of kegs and piled the other 18 on top of the open ones. As he pulled out his matchbox, Drew protested against lighting 500 pounds of powder at arm's length and warned Lanai that it certainly would be killed. Lanai stated he had handled powder for so many years that he knew what to do, and he wanted to teach Drew a lesson. So thereupon, Drew started running as fast as he could, and he only proceeded about 50 yards when he heard a most terrible explosion. Turning around, he saw Lanai spinning around like a top 60 feet in the air, his clothes being ablaze. This unfortunate man fell fully 75 feet from the spot where he went up. Every vestige of clothing, his hair was burned about his body, and the corpse was black. Drew was uninjured. As we get close to the mill now is starting to go down in terms of production. This is behind these pictures here. That's a charcoal retort over there, and that's where the wood is stored. But towards the 1890s, the production is starting to drop off. We have the expansion is out west, and the cost of freight to get the powder out west becomes prohibitive, and the production of the mill is really dropping off. This is one of the ponds that we spoke about, processing of powder. We can't identify that. There's Greenland Pond. And you can go on Greenland Pond today. You can tell exactly where it is. The berms are there. We hiked there in the wintertime, and there was water in it this weekend. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. It's, a lot of this got washed out in some of the hurricanes, so I understand from talking to Ralph Sweet, but Greenland Pond is there. And these are some of the ponds. Storage building up there.
That's in the powerhouse pond?
I'm sorry?
Those are the powerhouse pond areas? Greenland Pond?
Greenland Pond, how can I describe how you're going to get to Greenland? Greenland Pond is right off of Dust House, Powder Hill Road. When you're going up Powder Hill Road, Greenland Pond is on your right. It's that big indentation there. You go up a little bit further, you're going to get to the gates where the water company is. And Greenland Pond, you can walk down there, you can see where the buildings were, where there's ruins of buildings.
The river is kind of shallow. It's been hard to get barges down that thing.
Well, I think everything went by cart. It went down to the river by wagon, yeah, and then taken down by barges. And this is, again, I believe, is Magazine Pond. These are some of the other buildings. And somehow this got out of sync. I must apologize. This is my first presentation using this. That's the Astor House where Colonel Augustus Hazard died. So I think I'm a little out of sync here. That's where he died in 1868, that Astor House Hotel. Okay, and this is some of the raceways. And this, I believe, this is the Wallapot House. That's the furthest building going down Powder Hill Road. It'll be on your right. And you can find bricks there. That's all you can find are bricks. And here's an 1872 ascent. This is the railroad in Skiddaco. They're now able to load powder, which is a big help to get it. Now we're up at what I call the mill. And that's the mill that was in production when we get towards the end of the powder works. And this is a press mill. Just look at those faces. Unbelievable.
Was the powder unstable and would just blow off?
As long as it was kept wet, it was okay. I'm being simplistic, but a spark, who knows what would cause it? One of the things that would cause a spark, if you're hauling the powder by wagon, at first they had horseshoes. So the first wagon's okay, but if you've got kegs leaking in the first wagon, the second team of horses going to hit a rock and have a little bit of a spark, they're going to blow up. So they went to wooden horseshoes.
How about a static electricity? Could that set it off?
Could it? I'm sure. I'm not gonna, even though I own the mill, I'm not an expert. Yes, sir.
Where did they source the sulfur nitrates in the early days?
The sulfur came from Sicily.
And the nitrates?
Nitrates came from Chile. Potassium nitrate,
Yeah.
and sodium nitrate came from Chile.
Chile.
Yeah, because they got cut off. Because during the Civil War, England was tottering. The Union was worried that England was going to come in on the side of the Confederacy. So, and there were blockades. So England stopped shipping powder to the north. Yes, sir.
How many people were employed at the works?
It's a good question. I can't find an account of exactly how many people were employed at any one time. I mean, there are very few accounts about even the wages. I found one snippet on that. So we don't know. And we know how many people died. 67 people died, 66 men and one lady. This is the Upper Steam Sporting Works up by one of the original dams that I showed you, and this is where the last explosion took place. Getting up to 1897, another explosion happened on June 18th. The barn cracker, a small building attached to the plant of the Hazard Powder Company, was blown to pieces this afternoon by an explosion of a quantity of powder. In the building there, at the time, were 3 men, all of whom were instantly killed. And nearby stood a horse owned by one of the victims, and he too was torn to pieces. Several hours after the explosion, the company issued the following statement. This is a great human resource piece. At 1:20 this afternoon, a corning mill was blown to pieces and 3 men were killed. The money damages amounted to about $5,000. The men were in the wheelroom and their bodies were thrown distances from 25 to 100 feet, but the remains were only slightly mutilated. Another one. Corning mill poured the Hazard Powder Works. The shock was felt for miles around. A great deal of glass in the windows of the houses in the village were broken, and several valuable stained glass windows in the Methodist and Episcopal churches were badly shattered. 6 heavy skylights in the rear of E.C. Allen's store were all broken. The cause of the explosion is a mystery, and will remain so, as the only man who could explain it was killed. The loss was about $3,000, no insurance. But one man did actually have a life insurance policy for $1,000, and that will go to his widow. He leaves 2 children. Fragments of his bodies were picked up within 10 rods around the site, around the corning mill. The greater part of his body cannot be found. That's really nice.
Was there a research and development branch of this company?
They did do testing, and some of the accounts of the testing resulted in death. And that's where Hazard's son was killed testing, and his future son-in-law was testing. This is where the mill, the last area of the mill's production. This is the far east. This was called the Upper Steam Sporting Works. sorting mill. You can see the blast walls that were made out of wood. If you go up there today, that's by the upper dam. If you go up on the hill, there's a lot of it's been washed away. You can actually see the only rafters that we can find, the only wooden beams left of the mill are there. And this is the mill after it exploded. You can see it's been blown out, the walls are blown out. And there's the 8-ton wheels there. Look at the destruction. Now, in this, the last explosion took place, and this is a powder magazine. I believe there were 3 magazines. And of course, it was very controversial in town where the powder was going to be stored. And one of the anecdotes, too, Hazard's son, George, put out a pamphlet in 1853 saying what a rotten bum his father was, that he was going to blow up the whole town, and that the town should get together and vote